I just want to say a very big welcome to everybody here. Our speaker is Adam Ramsey, and he's from Open Democracy, which is actually been shortlisted for a very big journalistic award at the moment. So quite exciting to have Adam with us to talk about I think the independent media, or whatever term you want to use. We'd like to call it the Republican press because it's democratic. So I'll say no more, but to hand over to Adam Ramsey now.
If you think back, say, 20 years to the kind of, maybe 25 years to the early days of the internet, people were very excited about the prospect of, or some people were, of independent media beyond the kind of corporate and oligarch controlled press. And yeah, it's worth thinking back to that. Of course, there was a long history before then of publications which were owned either democratically or sort of outside mainstream capitalist ownership models, or state ownership models. But with the rise of the internet, there was this big hope that there'd be a lot more of that. And kind of an early example I remember back when I was a student was Indie Media, which people might be familiar with. And I think it's just interesting to reflect on the fact that there was a kind of bit of a flourishing of that. And then there was this period in the kind of late noughties when there were lots of independent bloggers, and there was a kind of real flourishing of energy, and people started to build up audiences and get more and more people reading them. And then suddenly we had the sort of arrival of the mega social media platforms, which in a way we can see as a small number of vast companies taking ownership of that conversation. And throughout all of that period, so Open Democracy was first conceived by Anthony Barnett and others in 1999. Company was registered in 2000. Website launched in 2001. So it's kind of been there, chugging along throughout. I joined in 2013, so 10 years ago. And I suppose in my time, what's been interesting has been this shift. I was asked a question at the outset by Carol, what do we call ourselves? And I don't really know the answer, because the relationship between what you might describe as the legacy press, so the old newspapers who've made that transition online, but who've lost enormous amounts of revenue to through advertising to Google and Facebook, and have kind of been bought up largely by oligarchs in order to try and influence, in the case of the UK at least, influence British politics. But you see the same phenomenon certainly in France and a lot of Western Europe and in the States. Um, but those institutions are sort of relying on their previous markets as newspapers. So particularly the print products are very heavily dependent on much older audiences. The online products survive, but they struggle to make money doing it. Famously, they make a bit of profit, but not as much as of a return as their investors could get by investing in other things. And so it feels like what's happened in the last 5 years has been this big shift towards what you might a kind of almost a mainstreaming in the politics of alternative media, and it's quite interesting to observe. So you see, for example, for the first time, I don't know if you've come across the website, the Tortoise, which is kind of full of lots of establishment figures giving the same establishment views, but in what we might see as the format of sites like Open Democracy and so on, more kind of which were originally spaces only for political views that you didn't get from the mainstream. And in a way, you had this kind of rush of mainstream political ideas into the kinds of spaces which were previously the crevices that alternative media, other kinds of views. I say other kinds of views because that was true. These were used both by left and by right wing cranks and conspiracy theorists and a whole load of other people who you might not like. So wasn't a wholly kind of wasn't only a positive thing, although I like to think that our presence was positive. Um, and I suppose for me, the challenge now, the question now, for a site like Open Democracy, but also more broadly for what we're encouraged to call the Republican media, um, is to think, well, if our uniqueness isn't just our format, but also our ideas, we haven't got first mover advantage anymore in being websites online which don't charge for content, which is kind of what we were for a while. Then what are we next and what do we have? And I suppose part of the the other shift for us that's been quite interesting for me, and I know I'm rambling a bit here, um, has been in the last 5 years or so, we've gone from being much more, in a sense, from a left wing perspective, traditional analysis, moving into more and more investigations. That means, in a sense, a shift in the other direction of um, historical alternative media, moving into what was the traditional role of um, the bigger traditional media outlets, bigger legacy media outlets of doing investigations. And that, again, has been a kind of massive trend within the industry because the as revenue has collapsed in the bigger newspapers, um, they've basically sacked all their investigations units. And so what you increasingly find is that the investigations, which means the people deciding, what bits of the establishment or people with power are going to be looked at and uncovered, and to some extent, therefore, deciding what counts as news, um, is often being outsourced to smaller outfits who then get picked up by, mainstream legacy media. And so for me, that's, an interesting opportunity in that you no longer have as many Times and Telegraph journalists running around creating news. What you have is them reporting on something that someone else has decided is news, and that gives an opportunity for, in a sense, everyone to uh, investigate, research power and the powerful, and construct stories about what does and what doesn't count as news. And I suppose that's my opening little ramble. And I'm mostly just interested to chat with all of you about where you think the Democratic media, the Republican media is at, and what we should be doing next.
Thank you very much. So you're saying that what what open democracy is doing now is rather doing an investigative work than just purely left wing left wing media, as it were.
Well, I don't mean that in the investigations always have a politics to them. Who are you investigating? What counts as a bad thing that you're uncovering or not? You know, um, so I don't mean that the politics have changed. What I mean is that there's a difference between analysis, comment and analysis, and investigation. And we've definitely, over the last 5 years, shifted from doing more analysis to doing more investigation.
Mm.
Trying uncovering new news more. Um, Now, I think both are important. I'm not saying that that's what one of those is better than the other, but it is a fact of the matter that as the capitalist press has struggled to make income from advertising revenue because all that money's gone to Google and Facebook, one of the first things they tend to have cut has been their investigation units. And so one of the things that um, and that is largely that function is being replaced by various other kinds of outlets, including us, but also others. And the politics of that obviously is not, it's not always necessarily progressive or on the left. So Guido Fawkes would be an example of a right wing outfit which, does investigations, break stories that then get picked up by the legacy media. But both and in a sense, some of what Open Democracy does is the kind of work that publication like The Guardian might have done 10 years ago. Um, Hopefully, slightly more radical than that. But that's a shift in the kind of the nature of media capitalism that's happened over the last decade. And in a way, has been an interesting opportunity to explore for us, certainly. And you see it, it's not just us, you see it in various other outlets as well.
Yes, it's been a big problem. Investigative journalism has definitely taken a dive with the lack of money. That's, as you say, that was the first thing to go. So I think it's a really important thing that you're doing, because Watergate would never have happened, of course, without really good investigative journalism. Or you may not think so, but anyway, I've got two hands up already, so I'm going to bring Mike in and then John.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think that it's not only just investigative journalism is the first thing to go when there's a lack of money. There's a large amount of money swirling around at the top, but they have no wish whatsoever to investigate themselves. Why would they? So it is a policy decision. It is a direct political act to axe investigative journalism. I'm always mildly surprised when occasionally the Sunday Times produces, a legacy of its own past, which is an investigation which shines a light on some skullduggery. But I would say, I really have been reliant upon you guys, Open Democracy and the Good Law Project, that those two campaigns to really hold the system's feet to the fire. Ain't nobody else. Ain't really the Guardian most of the time, even though they trump their investigations like nobody else. Certainly ain't the BBC. Newsnight, well, that's been cut. Channel 4 News, well, that's been sort of faced an into the firing line, lots of attacks. So you guys have been fearless. And there's a hell of a lot of us who really, note that and rely upon you to go where others do not.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mike. I'm going to bring in John now. If you want to say anything, if you want to say anything, Adam, in response, just give me a wave and you can come back in. So it's John Tumman now.
Right, thank you very much, Carl. Yeah, thank you, Adam. That was really interesting. If schematic, taking us through the last 20 to 25 years and what actually happened with the internet. I'm just thinking of a book that I read a few years ago. I think it might have been called something like Flat Earth or something, but it was written by an investigative journalist on one of the majors who was actually saying what we're doing is dying. Um, and what's killing it, he was arguing at the time, was the ticker tape messages at the bottom of news programs, which were basically, the media eating itself, um, as you described, that stories get bounced around from one to the other and so on now with minimal investigation. So I agree with Mike in supporting what you investigative journalism. Um, which I think is really important. I just wonder how many people, how many investigators do you actually have? And other people who are doing this, how many investigators do they have? I mean, is there an increasing number of people doing this and coalescing around platforms that were already in existence, like yourselves, or what?
Good question, John. Do you want to come back to that immediately, Adam?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that what I didn't talk about is our kind of own finances and economics, and that in a way is equally interesting. So I feel like there was a so as I said, I've been living in Roxy since 2013. I feel like there was a key moment around 2016 when a lot of people, certainly in the UK and the US, realized that the death of what you might describe as traditional media was causing problems, and started to be willing to invest money in it. And so, whereas before then, the Open Democracy UK team was me and one other person, really. And it was very, very hard to raise money, and we spent a lot of our time doing that. Um, since then, it's been much, much easier. And so we now have, I was trying to do the sums in my head, but there's maybe 10 of us covering the UK. So it's a much bigger team. And that is funded partly through, so the thing that's proportionally grown the most has been what we call reader revenue. So people giving £5, £10 a month to us as an outlet. And that was 10 years ago. The idea that people voluntarily give money to the media was entirely alien. People, if you tried fundraising in that way, most people just thought that was absurd. Now people, I don't mean everyone in the country, but there is a broad swathe of people with broadly centre-left politics who understand that if they want to have decent journalism, they need to pay for it. And that means that they contribute to us. The Guardian has also got a big donor scheme, and so on. So it's not just us, but that's been a huge shift in media economics. My salary now is entirely paid by our readers volunteering to give us money regularly once a month, and that has changed my life because I don't have to spend time fundraising. I don't have to go cap in hand to big funders to pitch projects to them that I might, try and do work on. I can just go and research and write about and investigate whatever I think is interesting at a given time, and that's that's transformative, and that's one of the things that's allowed us to change the nature of our work, by which I mean do much more of it. So I felt that was half of the question. I felt there's another half of the question. Can you remind me what it was?
Um, I don't think there was a first half. It was just leading up to that. Yeah, about others as well, about other similar investigative efforts, and is it the fact that people who want to do investigative work sort of coalesce around the
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, I mean, it is the case that there's often, certainly, there's a kind of collaboration among, we're not for profit, and we have, obviously a particular set of politics. I mean, I sometimes say open democracy is a space between space of conversation between socialists and liberals. Most of the staff are probably closer to the former end of that spectrum than the latter, but the audiences we bring together, we're not sectional. We have a bigger, clearly on the left, but we stretch across a bit of the left, I think. Um, but and similarly, we collaborate with other, groups, investigative journalists with, broadly similar politics, interested in the same kinds of things. If sometimes when they're from traditional and for-profit outfits, but more often it's more likely that they'll be from not-for-profit outlets. So an interesting example is that Greenpeace now has an investigations unit that employs people who were previously investigative journalists for places like the BBC and the Guardian, and they're churning out stories that then get picked up by the rest of the press. Again, 10, 15 years ago, that would have been seen very strange indeed. But the research, I mean, Greenpeace might have written a report in the past and done research in that sense. But the idea they have an investigations unit, a media outfit of their own, is very, is very much a new development. And the fact that, the NGOs increasingly move into that space, and we'll often collaborate with them. And I suppose I'd see us as somewhere within that spectrum in a sense.
Thanks very much.
There was, I realized what the other half of it was, which is that, of course there's a politics to it. You're absolutely right that as the capitalist model of the media was, and Chomsky wrote about this, 40 years ago, was that you sell advertising revenue, and advertisers will only advertise in places that are not totally anti-corporate. But that's, there's a level of influence there that's insidious, but it's kind of minimal. It's not enormous. It did exist, but it's not, but it allowed for some space for debate. What's happened since then, as advertising revenues collapsed, is that, no one invests in the media as the best way to get a return on capital. And so people who buy up newspapers or in the US TV stations or whatever are doing so in order to have political influence. And people who can have enough money to do that tend to be very, very rich and very, very right wing. And so you end up with this phenomenon in the UK where almost all of our main newspapers, the Guardian being the only exception, are owned by offshore oligarchs who've bought them not because they bring a return on capital, because they don't. They bought them because they want political influence through their newspapers. And so, as you say, of course, they're not regularly going around investigating the powerful. No, there are exceptions to that because there are obviously factions within capital. The Independent's a very interesting example. And if you know Lebedev's politics on the subject of Belarus and look at independent coverage of Belarus, then you'll find them using alignments. And similarly, Lebedev in Saudi Arabia, Saudi's own some of it. There are splits in there. And there also is, they understand the need to retain credibility, both with their audience and also with their staff. Because most people who, go to work as journalists, they might not be, on the radical left, but they certainly usually want to be doing some kind of journalism, and so they need to be able to to maintain good staff. They need to let them sometimes go and investigate something and break some stories, or else they lose all credibility and then they don't have any influence in the first place. So yeah, there's a few hands up. So should we?
There's a few hands up there. So I'm going to bring Norman and then Phil in. Norman.
Yeah, thank you, Anka. Thanks very much, Adam. It's extremely interesting. I just have a short question to ask you. You've probably heard about the Media Reform Coalition. It was established about 10, 12 years ago. The idea was campaigning for increased diversity and accountability in the British media. I wonder if you happen to know anything much about them and how successful they have been. Has their campaign for increased diversity actually resulted in very much?
Yeah, I mean, they do good work, and they're kind of very, I would associate them in my mind with the academic department at Goldsmiths, who look particular at the media, and with people like Natalie Fenton, who's a brilliant professor there. The first thing I'd say is, they do in that they are helpful to those of us who work in what you might call alternative media outlets, just by organising conferences, bring us together, and I've worked with Natalie on various things and so on. And so in that sense, they've had an impact. In another sense, campaigns get laws changed and so on. It's fair to say that I wouldn't say there's been anything positive from the government in the last, how long it's been, 13 years, perhaps for obvious reasons. Now, would we have hoped that we'd get positive reforms from the next government? I would be surprised, but I wouldn't blame the Media Reform Coalition for that. I think that, we can't blame people doing good work, campaigning for good things, for the fact that Keir Starmer is Keir Starmer.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, thanks very much. That's good.
But yeah, they do good work. I would definitely recommend them if that's the question. They're friends and allies and comrades and helpful.
Yes. I've recently put in a motion to our local Labour Party. That's the International Labour or Labour International, suggesting that Labour Party actually affiliates to the media reform.
Great. Great.
So that's to come. So I don't know what's going to happen to that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Norman. Great question. I'm going now to bring in. I'm going to bring. Phil was there. Phil.
Hello, Adam. Lovely, really lovely to talk to you. I'm trying to remember. I think you did a piece on the coronation, if I'm not wrong. Is that right? And I really liked your analysis where you pointed out that the real issue was going on outside and inside. It was totally and utterly its own kind of self-contained theatre, and that brought me and myself and Steve to look at the whole. In Chartist, we took a look at the whole protest laws and so on that were passed, and one of the conclusions we drew from that whole experience was. You presented an overarching, if you like, a tapestry of what the state was up to on that day, which was the whole, that strange effect it had on the crowd outside, what was going on inside. And yet in a strange way, it was all totally detached. I'd urge anybody to perhaps we get hold of a link and we can put it up somewhere where we can on our website so that everyone can get into what I'm talking about. What you wrote, but my real point was that to our point of view is that there needs to be a sort of hyperstatic, overarching something going on here. Because my critique of a lot of these things, because I'm a huge supporter of open democracy and Byline Times, which incidentally I picked up a copy of in Smith's the other day and thought, bloody hell, this is pretty good. I hadn't realised it was there. But it seems to me that you need a kind of coalition like they had in California in the counterculture, where they all link together in this kind of syndicated fashion and were able to push their stuff to different the LA Press, the San Francisco Chronicle, all that stuff. They were able to kind of engage these different papers and get the stories out. And also, we need a kind of idea of what our overall aim is. And I suppose in my case, and Steve's probably would say is the same, it's about democracy and accountability, and democracy is the key thing. And to conclude, I would say, much as I like the Good Law Project, and I do, I think it's a ridiculous commentary on our constitutional setup that we have a voluntarily funded organization like the Good Law Project carrying the weight of entirely making accountable the state for its. I mean, it's just absurd. Any other country being a republic, there wouldn't be this kind of need to deal with the Crown executive via ad hoc charities, to be frank. So my view, I suppose, is to say, what do you think about an alliance, which is what I think Norman was talking about, and also what about actually having a kind of manifesto, if you like, a democratic Republican, if you like, but certainly a democratic program, so that we all can tie you into an overall picture rather than just being individual organizations, much as each one needs to keep its own discrete identity. Sorry, I haven't put that very well, but I had the painters and decorators in, so I had to sort of dodge the paints and the painters. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Phil. I think that's a really, really good question. Would you like to answer that straight away, Adam?
Sure, why not? I always remember the former co-convener of the Scottish Socialist Party, Colin Fox, saying that nothing divides the left like a call for unity. I suppose I think that collaboration is great, and I think we're pretty good at collaborating at OD. We work closely with Byline Times and with lots of other outlets, with Navarro sometimes, etc. I feel like you drew the analogy of the media in the 60s in California, and I don't know much about the specific example, but I think the big thing that's changed in media landscape then and consumption of it is that it used to be the case that there were a small number of newspapers that basically everyone bought. You either bought this one or that one, but it was one of three. It's now the case that audiences are scattered all over huge numbers of different platforms and experiencing the media and getting their political input in a way from lots of different places. And what you need then is different people who are skilled at talking to those different audiences, doing it in the ways that work for them. And so, if you want to reach millions of young people on TikTok, you probably want a young person on TikTok to be talking with them and doing political education through that platform. If you want to reach, people, I'm 38, so people of my age, then, we tend to be on Facebook and Twitter, and we watch Netflix, but we don't probably watch Rolling News TV anymore. If you go up another 10 years in the age spectrum, then you get people who sit down and watch TV every night. And so those, they're very different experiences of the media in a way that wasn't true in the 60s. And that leads to a kind of need for a more fractured media landscape. But of course, what you have to then put back into that is some kind of space where you can talk and build your politics and share analysis and help build shared understanding. I'm not sure that requires sitting down together and developing manifestos or a manifesto. I think that it requires conversation, bring people together, etc. We had a big conference here in Scotland a couple of weeks ago called the Break Up of Britain ? And lots of people asked me, what's the point of a conference? But we got hundreds of people together to come and discuss their politics and ideas and where we're at right now and so on. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I'm much more in favor of that kind of convening, bringing lots of people together, discussing ideas, than necessarily trying to come to some kind of agreement about the text of a manifesto or whatever. I'm more in favor of people throwing out their ideas. I think we probably all have roughly similar political ideas, but obviously, if a political party is running for government, it should lay out its manifesto for the country, and that's useful. People being in political parties is a good thing to encourage you to think in that way, in that programmatic way. But I'm not sure that trying to get the dog doing well, trying to get whoever the left together to agree what a particular manifesto is necessarily. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go and shut the dog up because he's feeling stressed out by something. It's necessarily where I put resources, but I'm not against other people doing it. It's all right, Hamish. Good boy. So yeah, I suppose that's a sort of, but I also think, that there's if people in Britain in particular at the moment, we're at the depths of real crisis of the state, and so before we can have any kind of conversation about what the state might do, if we were to draw up some kind of manifesto, the first thing we have to do is think about, well, what state do we have? What's it for, etc. And bringing people together for that kind of conversation, I think, is very important and could be very powerful. So in that sense, I absolutely agree that bringing people together for programmatic conversations about how to transform the world and what structures we use to do that, absolutely vital. I just don't really care if we agree a text or manifesto at the end of that process. And I like to think that, one of the things we try and do on Open Democracy is facilitate that kind of conversation about what the world could be like, as well as, the investigative work we do. We used to sometimes say our slogan was to challenge power, inspire change. I suppose that's the second half of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. The state structure has to change, and if with a conversation like that going, that's really, really important. That'd be marvelous if that can come about in a big way. I'm going to bring Steve in now. Steve Freeman.
Sorry. Hi, Adam. Yeah, I just want to go around, just explore around the theme that I had, this Republican press idea, which is because you were using the term originally well, I think when you think, what should we call ourselves? Independent press, possibly left press. And I suppose by the term Republican, and I mean a left press, I mean a radical press, but not necessarily a socialist, not like the Morning Star or Socialist Worker, a different kind of press. I don't mean running lots of stories about King Charles all the time. All that could be a little bit part of it. I think that's to miss the whole idea. I think the idea of a civic republicanism, in other words, one is exactly what you've described, what Open Democracy is doing, investigating power, making power accountable. I think that's what a civic activism, civic republicanism, civic journalism, if you like, is doing. And it seems to me, from as I can see it, that's exactly what the kind of thing that Open Democracy and others are doing. And I was thinking a little bit about the Chartist movement, because there was a democratic movement in the 19th century, and there were lots of different papers. I can't even remember all of them, apart from the Northern Star. Phil could probably mention a few more. There were lots of them. And so there was a press grew up around a democratic movement, independent kind of press, but there was some overarching thing that kind of meant they were sort of on, not the same, but they were sort of going at the same problem, the lack of democracy. So that's one aspect to it. I think the other aspect of it is this thing that makes it more dynamic. In other words, we are having a crisis of democracy. And we have this danger of authoritarianism. And the other side of that is to fight against that, and to fight for democracy is something we're going to be forced to do. And therefore, if we didn't have a Republican press in that sense, if we didn't have a democratic press, the conditions would force it to emerge. People would come and say, we need to have this kind of press, exactly, because circumstances are forcing it. And I think quite rightly, you mentioned the conference in Scotland. The recognition that Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland are kind of working on a different kind of dynamic to where we are here in England. So I think, and I'll finish on this point, I think that events outside what you're doing will also fuel what you're doing, if you see what I mean. I mean, the biggest democratic movement we have at the moment is the pro-Palestinian movement. People coming out and protesting, citizens coming out and taking action, protesting against the terrible crimes that are going on in Gaza. And those are people who are not socialists. They're citizens, really, who want their government to behave they see their government is unaccountable. They see that they have no control over it. They see that they're wedded to politics that the majority of people in this country do not want, because most people, 76%, do believe in an immediate ceasefire. So I think there's, as well as what you're doing, I think you're swimming. Okay, I'm saying that, you know, if I thought Open Democracy was a kind of Republican press, not because of lots of articles attacking Charles Stewart. He's not Charles Stewart, there is he?
Charles Windsor, different person.
Yeah. So not because of that, but because it's about, you say, democracy and accountability. So
yeah,
in that sense, there is a reason for Byline Times and Open Democracy. And somebody today told me, and I don't really know much about this, Left Foot Forward being another. There are a whole number of press which are doing this sort of working in this kind of area. So I think, you know, hopefully we can work together in 2024, because I think we need to do. We want to build a democratic movement, a Chartist kind of movement with a Chartist press, I suppose, if I could have an analogy for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's right. And I suppose that when I talk about the oligarch-owned press, that's just one element of the broader sense in which we increasingly have oligarch-controlled politics. Yeah. And, you know, that's, if there's a, you know, we try to see power in not in an overly simplistic way. So power resides in states and in capital and in patriarchy and various other forms. But and you know, when we challenge power, we challenge all of it. But absolutely, it's also the case internally within the media. You know, the media is a tool of that and is structured much like a lot of the rest of capital. Although I think you have to see it as a kind of particular part of the structure of power in the country, rather, you know, in an independent way, rather than only just a subset of capital. So I think you're right. Yeah. I was going to say something else and I've forgotten what it was. So we've got a bunch of hands up. So I didn't come back to those, and I'll see if I remember.
Wales and Scotland. I don't know. I'm trying to give you a clue. No, okay. Anyway.
Yeah, no, well, sure. I mean, oh yeah. So, and the other thing that is interesting and important is that about the Palestine movement in particular is that it's so global, and you know, one of the functions of the press has always been to construct national identities. You know, if depending on how far you're willing to go, but Benedict Anderson famously argued that nations were an invention, imagined communities were an invention of the print press, that print capitalism is what allowed nationalism to emerge, senses of, you know, national opinion and public opinion and so on. And clearly, you know, in the last decade, and particularly with the internet, there has been a bit of a rewiring of that. And you don't just see that through Open Democracy and a website, you know, and left movements. You see it also through things like Netflix. If you go to Italy, everyone in Italy watches Spanish Netflix and watches shows from Latin America because that's the best shows that they can find. And so that creates a whole new kind of cultural community. Similarly, you ask people of my age what TV they're regularly watching, it's more likely to be set in New York than in London. So what's their cultural capital? You know, that's shifted. There's a huge shift in the boundaries. And you have these much bigger linguistic blocks in a way than used to. You know, the Arab world now, people all watch Lebanese soap operas in, you know, in a way that's quite different from, you know, when in the past you might go and read your local newspaper. So you know, that's been a huge transformation of people's experience of the media that's happened because of technological changes. And what's interesting is that we've had, you know, particularly with this moment around Palestine, we saw it a bit with Occupy movements around the world. We saw it to some extent 20 years ago with anti-Iraq movements. But I think more than any other time in my life, we've seen a real flourishing of a genuinely global movement against the genocide in Gaza, which hasn't, you know, it's kind of unprecedented. And for young people who are kind of learning their politics and becoming adults at the moment now, that's going to be transformative. It's going to change their politics in a way which I think lots of us are going to struggle to understand. And as a media outlet, you know, we have to be thinking about that. I would argue that I don't do any editing work anymore, and I might, you know, and I've argued internally we should be doing more on this. But I think that's, yeah, absolutely fascinating, and it's going to be really important.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a whole this whole movement of pro-Palestine movement is really a pivotal moment, I think. It's so important. I'm going to bring Jennifer in. So Jennifer Devlin is now going to give her ask her a question or give her contribution?
Thanks for coming on, Adam. Thanks. I do actually contribute to Open Democracy and have done
Well, thank you then.
for some time. Yes, I know. And that's partly what I wanted to ask about. Really, it's the economics of all this. I mean, where do I put my money? You know, I noticed that looking at the list of standing orders, I could contribute to a range of organisations that I find interesting and informative and challenging and make me feel good because they agree with my prejudices. And I'm also very interested in the links with America, the fact that it's possible now to watch comparable organisations in America and find how very similar the thinking is at a certain level across the pond, despite the fact that their majority politics is so different from ours and so horrible, basically. But then our majority politics is horrible as well. So we've got a lot in common. I mean, do you see all these organisations surviving? I noticed that Canary, for example, has gone. It's become a cooperative now, hasn't it? You're a not-for-profit. Lots of I don't know how the Good Law Project functions or some of the others, but that it's a very rich tapestry of opportunities out there that we never had before when we used to read The Guardian, and that was kind of it, wasn't it? That was the acme of news, that you read The Guardian and hoped that the Observer would do its insight stuff on a Sunday, which it hasn't done for a very long time, of course. It's given up on investigative journalism as far as I can see. So I'm glad that you feel you're flying the flag for investigative journalism. So should I feel, one question is, should I feel guilty for not contributing to the American sites that I regularly visit and read and listen to? But I do salve my conscience to a certain extent by contributing to British sites. I mean, how is the economics of all this? Are they going to survive? Or is there a squeeze or anything like that? Should we be worried about the future of these independent sites, which are so important? Thank you.
It's a good question. The first thing actually is a really boring practical thing, which is I should go at 7. I've left my poor wife with our 2 small children, and I think more than an hour would be a bit too long to ask of her. But well, firstly, thank you for your money, Jennifer. That's very generous of you, and it does make a massive difference. The economics of open democracy are that it's still the case that a majority of our funding comes from big trusts and foundations. So there's various sort of progressive foundations that, both within the UK and globally, that give us some money, usually for particular projects. So normally that's for, a particular strand of work that we've pitched to do, and they'll write us a check. The smaller portion of our money is from people like you giving regular donations. But what that allows us to do is whatever we think is most important at a given moment, rather than whatever we told the funder 2 years ago we were going to do in 2 years' time. And that allows us to develop new projects, which means we can sometimes then go and pitch those projects to funders if we think that's important. So, at the moment, our biggest funded strand of work globally is our what we call 50/50, which is investigating the backlash against women's and LGBT rights around the world. We do a lot of work investigating kind of ultra-conservative money in the States pouring into sub-Saharan Africa and so on. That's all funded by trusts and foundations and big global feminist funds and so on. But that project was designed by a couple of colleagues and me, and because we had time to think and to do some research and to write before that about that challenge and how Trump came into power on the back of that kind of sweep of masculinity and patriarchy and so on. So what what the funding from readers, what we call unrestricted funding, allows us to do is the things that keeps us alive, even though it's not the biggest chunk of the funding. If you see what I mean. So I'd say it's the more important part, even though it's the smaller part, because it funds, it funds the brain, and it allows us to go and get the rest of the money. And to answer your question, I mean, the media environment is changing very, very rapidly. So it would be extraordinary if lots of people who exist now, don't go bust in the next 10 years. Obviously, that could include us. I don't know. I hope, we've survived more than 20 years now. I hope we'll continue to survive. But, we only continue to survive because we, keep working hard and adapting. And in large sense, mostly what we've done in the last 10 years is grow enormously. And if we hadn't done it, I think we probably would have just died.
So, Mike, I'm bringing Mike back in again.
Yeah, in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. That chant, which was there on Saturday and is on all the Palestine demos, just summarizes the internationalization of this campaign of active citizens, as Steve says. And I really agree with Phil also that it's come to a pretty parlous state where, charities are the ones who are taking the lead in holding government to task in many ways. People right on the margins of things. But I just wanted to ask you specifically what the more mainstream sort of leftish media has are columnists. We have Owen Jones. We have George Monbiot, albeit this is a bit of a Jonah. Yes, indeed, yeah. But we also have the Maliks, Nesreen, Kenan. I'm particularly fond of Kenan Malik. He's an ex-comrade of mine. But how do you guys relate to them? And do they jump off their sort of celebrity pulpits and actually muck in with you guys? And do you find them helpful, or do you find them prima donnas?
I like both Owen Jones and George Monbiot very much. I mean, what they are, to put it more narrowly, those two people are the two people who've got columns in The Guardian from a more left-wing perspective. And I'd say on the whole, both of them are pretty good at reflecting the views of broader left-wing social movements. And certainly George has been, very good at sometimes taking investigations we've done, writing about them for a bigger Guardian audience and crediting us when he does so, and he'll ring you up and check he's got his facts right and so on. So no, I mean, I am, there are people who have columns, certainly in The Guardian. I'd struggle to think beyond that, but who are comrades and do a good job, and I'm grateful for it and would see them as broadly collaborative. Certainly George and Owen will be on that list. You won't hear me criticise either of them. And Navarra, no, I mean, similarly, I like the guys at Navarra very much. And again, my attitude is towards them is comradely and collegiate, and I know some of them personally. There was I used to live in Oxford years ago when I was first studying, and I used to go on Navarra about once every fortnight. So, I am I'm all in favour of all these people doing their thing, and I'm delighted to see that there's more and more, people, growing up. Navarra in particular has been a real success story of the last decade, and that's great. I don't, you're not going to catch me criticizing comrades in the already too small and too fractured left-wing media. On the whole, I think they all do a good job in tough circumstances. And while I occasionally disagree with one or other thing they might have said, I don't like to bang on about
that. Adam, I'm sort of taking over because Carol's had to go, and I know you've got to go, so I'm not going to detain you more. John's the only person who's got his hand up at the moment. I'm going to say to John that if John can make simply a question rather than a contribution, so Adam has to go, I think, unless it's really urgent, John. Do you want to come in, John?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. You have to keep it brief, though, for Adam's children's sake.
Yes, I can.
Go away, fire away then.
Where's my picture? Oh, well, anyway, you know what I look like. Yeah, my question was quite simple, actually. How many people are you reaching? And you talked about different, you said we need to have a fractured approach to audiences. Which audiences do you think you are reaching at Open Democracy and possibly other independent media as well? And which audiences do you think you're not reaching? And can you give us some kind of ballpark feel for how big this reach is?
Sure. I'm less on top of the OG numbers than I used to be. It was the case about 3 years ago that we had about 1 million reads a month. Since then, that number's fallen a bit, largely for two reasons. One is that Facebook has stopped promoting political content, and that was by far the biggest source of clicks we got was Facebook. And the other is that people are running away from Twitter. So because of Elon Musk buying Twitter, fewer people with decent politics are on it, and that was often how we reach people. So that number will be a bit lower than it was then, but I don't know what it is now. But it was, as I say, about 1 million reads a month about 3 years ago. Who those people are, a plurality but not a majority is in the UK for us, and we have the second biggest chunk is in the US, etc. So we could do a breakdown of that, but big English speaking audiences is kind of the obvious location, and demographically we reach a particular kind of a couple of different particular demographics. Probably the best descriptor is people with degrees, though, and that skews in various directions. And it also depends which platform you're looking at. So our video channels, YouTube is watched by slightly different people from who reads us on the website, for example. But we have an audience team that's very good at analysing all these things. And in the next week or two, we're hiring a new editor-in-chief whose job it will be to grow all those things. So we'll see what their strategy is when they arrive.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I'm going to thank you on behalf of everybody at the meeting. It's been really interesting, really fascinating. I can see it. All the comrades and their questions. I really enjoyed your contribution. So thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you for having me, and sorry for being a bit rambly.
No, it's been really good. It's been really good. It's been a really good and interesting meeting, and it opens up questions as well. As it doesn't answer the debate, it just begins it in many ways. And I hope we'll be able to talk in the new year as well.